Well, hello everybody. It's been a while since me and Dino had a chat. Um, I was away over the weekend, and Dino contacted me and said I've had an encounter, a close encounter, and of the JW kind. And I said, okay, next time we've got a bit of time, we'll do a chat. And funny enough, coincidentally, I had something happen to me with close encounters of the JW kind just yesterday. So we're going to see how much time we've got. But so Dino will do his first, and then depending how long our discussion goes, I may have to do a separate video of ours. But anyway, crack on, Dino.
Yeah, okay. Just yeah, last Friday there. I've been in the house a lot recently, doing a bit of decorating in the living room, a wee bit of work in the gardens. So I thought I need to get a day out, just go. So I got on a bus up to Glasgow for the day, and just went round the second-hand bookshops and second-hand CDs and LP shops that we go to. Picked up a couple of good CDs and a King James Bible, the Apocrypha within it, all for a bargain price, just about £10 for free purchases. So all good. Um, but I walked around the town and first port of call was Glasgow Central Station. And I was expecting to see the witnesses at the front, but there was nobody there. This was midday, early afternoon, so nobody there. And then I took a walk up the town, went to the West End and came back in. And eventually I was heading home. So I went up to Buchanan bus station again. And right enough, there was a couple of carts there. So there's the usual one in the sort of middle of the pavement
Yeah.
with the two sisters. I saw there was a brother towards the main entrance. So I thought I'll go speak to the brother because if he speaks to the sisters, the brother's going to intervene. So anyway, so I goes up, and a brother and a sister are standing against the wall, and they're actually again a few feet away from the cart, right? But they've got the
Yeah.
standing there with the backs to the wall with their magazines. And also, what they had was they had the convention, the district conventions next weekend, I believe. So
Yes.
they had one of the wee narrow invites that they're handing out, but they had that sticking out the top of where the magazine was, you know. Um, so this is them inviting people to the convention by standing against a wall, you know, and people just walking by.
Yeah.
So
Brilliant.
anyway, I walked up about half an hour or so before I go for my bus. So I speak to the brother first of all, and I says, and I pointed at the cart and they had the Enjoy Life Forever brochure.
All
Now,
right.
I've read that before, but I was visiting my dad recently, and the one brother that visits him had left a copy of it at some point.
Yeah.
So I had a wee
Okay.
browse through it again, and three things came to my notice straight away that this brochure doesn't say. It doesn't mention Jehovah's name, doesn't mention the kingdom, and it doesn't mention 1914, right?
Mm.
So that's their main sort of brochure that's always on the cart, and sometimes the image from it's on the top plate. And I thought, that's strange that it doesn't mention any of these three things. And I was visiting my dad a few days ago, and again he's got a small pile of watchtowers, and I had a look at one that was talking about the future, what's going to happen. And again, flicked through it. There wasn't one mention of 1914, right? So I thought the next time I speak to a carter, I'm going to ask about this. So I said to the brother, I says, I've read that brochure recently. Why does it not mention 1914 or the kingdom or even Jehovah's name? And he says, I says, well, it's just an introductory brochure, right? He says, if so, you read that, and if you get interested, you then do the Bible course that's associated with it, and you learn these things later. And I says, well, I can understand it being introductory. I says, but what happens if this is the only contact a person maybe has with JWs, and that they've bothered to stop and they picked up this one brochure, they take it away and read it, and there's nothing really out of the beyond about it that's in it, other than read your Bible basically, and the future's going to be rosy. It makes no mention of the kingdom, no mention of 1914. I said, so is 1914 really that still important to you? I said, what about Cedar Point, Ohio, 1922, when it was advertised the king and his kingdom, right? I says these were the main points that the preacher was. You had to point out about the king and the kingdom, and obviously, therefore, 1914, the establishment of that kingdom. I says, from way back then in 1922, this was the focus. So you're saying you're doing this public work, but you're not highlighting to people, and this might be their one opportunity speaking to you. You're not going to point out to them that the kingdom of God, kingdom of the heavens, was born in 1914, and the parousia began then. That could be the one thing that would spur people to find out more, and you're ignoring it. I says, can you explain to me how you get to 1914, what the chronology is that establishes that year? And obviously, he was a bit reluctant, and the sister that was there was kind of, I get that kind of look where you get looked up and down, they're kind of looking there and going, who is this, So they were a bit reluctant, and the best he could do was, he says, oh, Daniel, book of Daniel. Says, yeah. He says, Daniel 2:44, right? Now that's the scripture where the stone out of the heavens knocks the image down.
Yeah.
And I said, that's not really predicting 1914.
No, it isn't.
No, there's no connection between that and 19. Oh, yeah, it's talking about the establishment of God's kingdom, maybe removing man's kingdoms, but there's nothing there that tells you about 1914. And he was a bit stuck after that, and basically I then had to explain to him how they get to 1914. I think he'd mentioned Daniel 4 without knowing it was Daniel chapter 4, but he mentioned about 7 times Nebuchadnezzar.
Yeah.
And I says, yeah, but that's just about Nebuchadnezzar. It's not about calculating when God's kingdom's going to. You can't find from that. There's nothing in that chapter that says that's what it's about. It's about Nebuchadnezzar. So to cut it short, I said to him, it's Daniel chapters 8 and 9 that talk about that has any sort of bearing on a prophetic chronology. And I says, that's where the JWs get it from. I says, but you didn't get it directly from your own organisation, from Charles T. Russell. I says it was the Millerites and William Miller. And he goes, never heard of him. I said, well, William Miller of the Millerites, Adventist group. I says, and he basically did a chronology based on those 2 chapters that brought him to 1844. He says, and that was what they said the parousia was. And I said, you've heard of Nelson Barber? He says, that rings a bell. I says, well, Nelson Barber was an Adventist, and he got in contact with Charles Taze Russell, and he convinced Russell that 1874 was the parousia. And again, at this point, the sister's getting a wee bit kind of 1874 says, you do know that your organisation taught up until the 1930s that 1874 was the parousia. So, so they hadn't realised that. And I says, so basically then, your literature talks about how the Bible points to 1914. I says, but at best, using Daniel 8 and 9 and the Millerite calculation, I said, if the Bible points to anything, it points to 1844. It doesn't point to 1914 in any way. I says, you've not been able to give me an explanation for that at all. So I then said to him, it says 1844 was the date that Nelson and Barber took from Miller. I says, but they then added, because nothing happened then, they added 30 years, which they called the tarrying period. And then that took them to 1874. And that's when they said it was the parousia. And then they added another 40 years, a harvest period. The 30 years was Jesus' birth to when he began his ministry, and the 40 years paralleled from his ministry to the destruction of Jerusalem. So I explained that to them. That's how they calculated 1914. So after going through that with him, he eventually said to me, wait a minute, he was thinking about it. He says, 30 years and 40. Said, I don't see where you get the 30 years and the 40 years from. And I looked at him and I says, you don't see where I'm getting the 30 years and 40 years. I says, it's not me that's getting the 30 and the 40 years. I says, that's what Charles Taze Russell and Nelson Barber came up with. I says, so if you're not seeing where that's coming from, then you're basically not seeing where your organization came up with those. It's not me. I'm just relating what your organization teaches. So if you're not getting it, if it doesn't sound reasonable to you, which I think is what he was really saying, it doesn't sound reasonable, you just add 30 years and then 40 years. I said, well, that's the point. You know, he says there's nothing in the scriptures that points that out. Then the sister started, she eventually came into the conversation. And I think she was trying to get off the subject, the kind of deflection that they always do if they don't really want to talk about what you're talking about. And she says, blah, 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 Dino. And I looked at her and I thought, she's obviously clicked who I am or recognised me. Because again, I didn't know then to see, you know. So I says, all right, you know who I am, you know. I says, you know, where do I know you? Do I know you from previous years? And I says, she says, from Ayrshire, I was in the Ayrshire circuit. I says, what, were you maybe in Kilmarnock? Because I was in Kilmarnock congregation, or maybe Paisley or something like that. And she wouldn't say, right? All she would say was, I know you from the Ayrshire circuit, convention circuit, I think. So I don't know, again, whether it is someone that just simply recognised me from the circuit, or again, whether they've seen the videos or they've been briefed that Dino and Terry might be about, and you're likely to, if anybody approaches you, it's probably Dino or Terry, you know. But she recognised me, but wouldn't say how, you know, because I don't think she wanted to give away who she was. I should have asked her what her name was, but she was clearly reluctant to say. Anyway, she then came up with a strange one. After talking about the chronology and me having said to them, like, you know, I want you, Jesus, if you go on the website, you look at these books, it'll tell you how you get the chronology. I said, no. I says, I don't really need to know, because I do know. I know how you work it out. I just want to see whether you know how to work it out and whether you can explain it. And I says, and clearly you can't. You've got to go to the book and you've got to have it written in front of you before you can explain it. Because they kept saying, oh, it's too complicated to just go into this now. And I was saying, look, I'm happy if it's complicated. Yes. You tell me, you know, it doesn't matter how complicated, because I know the stuff. Do you know it? So she kind of deflected, and she did this one. She got onto how the Watchtower and the publications are translated into 120 languages throughout the world. Oh, that's great. You know, you've translated your publications into 120 languages. What that had to do with the chronology, I don't know, but it was that deflection again, where they're getting onto a subject that they want to talk about, or something that they think's praiseworthy, that convinces them that it's the truth. So I didn't think of it at the time. I came home and I thought about it, and I says, wait a minute. And I checked the computer and I says, you know that Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone has been translated into 85 languages, right? So if the Philosopher's Stone, Harry Potter books are translated into all these languages.
How many did you say?
Sorry?
How many did you say, Harry Potter?
85.
85.
85 languages it's been translated into.
And how many did she say for their translations? How many?
Watchtower Publications, 120.
Okay. Oh.
Right. But still, 85 languages for Harry Potter. But Harry Potter's still a fictitious book. You know, you can't fly about on a broomstick playing Quidditch. You can't cast spells and turn your cat into a carriage or whatever. So the fact that you can translate your publications into 120 languages doesn't mean that there's anything worthy
No.
in those publications just because it's
No.
translated so widely.
No.
Anyway, at that point, she suddenly goes, "Oh, the two sisters that are on the other car, it's time for their break. I'll need to relieve." Yeah, so she walks off. Doesn't say
Oh,
cheerio, and I was thinking she was going to come back. You know, she was off. So, but she went there, and one of the other sisters that I'd seen had then come up that she also relieved, but she went and stood by their cart, which was still some feet away, but she was
yeah.
standing there at the cart. I don't know why, you know, why not come in and join in the conversation? I'll just stand at the cart as if I'm guarding the cart, you know. Um, so yeah, the other thing I'd mentioned to him again was I said the other thing about the 1914. I said you start from the wrong date of 607 BCE, and I mentioned about the thing I've mentioned it before about speaking to Professor Jody Magnus, an archaeologist, well renowned archaeologist, and what she'd said about that. And he actually
Yeah, that's
said
right.
he'd never heard of that before. That he says that I says to them, Jehovah's Witnesses are the only group who say that Jerusalem fell in 607. He'd never heard that that was the case. He
Yeah,
thought
yeah.
that that was
Yeah,
history,
yeah.
you know. I says, no, no, no. I says, all academics believe it fell in 586 BCE. I says, you're the only group that say that because you need that date for your calculation from 607 to 1914, which is the second method they use for their chronology. And, you know, he actually said to me, he says, you know, you've given me something to think about.
Mm.
Um, and I says, well, I hope I have. I says, please go away and have a look at that. Now, his name was Matthew. I don't think he would mind me saying. His name's Matthew. He's from Dumfries congregation. He was kind of tall bloke, grey beard, but he was really, and this is the other point I wanted to make, was that we had a really nice conversation, right? There was no argy-bargy, there was no
Yeah,
hot under the collar. He was just a
yeah,
nice
yeah,
bloke. He
yeah.
was reasonable enough to speak to me and listen to what I had to say, and I let him speak.
Yes,
And we just had a nice
yes.
conversation, ended
Yeah.
up shaking hands, um,
Mm.
you know, and I said, well, please do have a look at that. And I said to him, rather than just simply walk away with you, having just, you know, put that on you, I says, please have a look at my YouTube channel, The Faithful Departed. I says, because I've done a series of videos about these topics.
Yeah,
I says, so
yeah,
please, I says, The Faithful Departed, have a look, and I'll go into this in more detail. So whether he does or not, I don't know. But it was good to be able to say to him, you know, I'll look at jw.org, but you look at The Faithful Departed. So it was a nice conversation. And again, it just shows that if there's any witnesses watching this, you know, that was the thing. They tried at first to sort of get out of the conversation at the very start. And I said to the sister, I said, but you are Jehovah's Witnesses, aren't you? I says, if you're a witness means you testify, right? I says, so if you're not going to testify and talk to me and answer questions, then you're not really being a witness,
mm.
you know? So, anyway, so they had to say something. So I quite enjoyed it. It was a good chat, and it was nice to
Good.
have a chat where you could shake hands and be
Yeah,
friendly about it. It's possible.
yes,
It's up
yes,
to, and this is the point, it's up to the witnesses to show the fruitage of the Spirit, to be reasonable,
yes.
and not just dismiss
Yeah,
anybody that dares to question
yeah,
thoughts, you know.
yeah.
Anyway, that was my wee example from Friday.
Well, it's good because when we met last time, you
Mhm.
said, "Do you want to go out?" And I was going like, "I don't," because I just thought I don't want to go and meet anybody who recognizes us and we know what's going on when it's something completely brand new. And this is what it should be. It should be a case of, you just want to engage in conversation to see, to see each other's viewpoint. And you want to, at the end of the day, walk away without them taking off the carts and storming away because, your audacity to ask them a tough question. And you just want somebody to just say, yeah, I appreciate you. You've obviously gone up spoken to him and he's probably appreciated the fact you're probably the first person who spoke to him that day, and that you're being genuine. And I think that's it. I think when we've spoken to you in the past, I think we have been genuine. But I think I just think it's nice that you get somebody who actually walks away. You're not mates or anything, but at least you came away not feeling down. You know?
Absolutely, we just had a nice chat.
Yeah,
Whether I convinced him of anything, I don't know.
yeah,
He certainly wasn't even able to try and convince me of anything.
yeah,
But it was just an exchange of views, a
yeah,
conversation, and
yeah.
no problems. So
Right.
it's not our attitude that's the problem. It's
Yeah,
in the past. It's been the ones that we've approached have got
yeah,
the attitude problem.
yeah,
you know,
yeah.
there's no need for the sort of bad tempers and the storming
No.
off and refusing to talk to us. Um, so shows it can be
Well,
done.
right. Well, that's interesting. Yeah. So I think the one I'm going to have to talk about is even more expansive than that, and it's going to take
Yeah,
more than the allotted time. So what I'll do is I'll end this, okay,
yeah,
and then we'll do another video. So we'll do yours and we'll do the one because mine might, essentially, has got bigger ramifications. And it does involve an awful lot of people that I have to remember off the top of my head. So I'm just going
sounds
to end
juicy.
this. It
Sounds
is
good.
juicy. Okay. I don't reveal any secrets yet, but be quiet, Dougal. He obviously knows. Right, quiet. So I'll just end this and I'll send you another invite on second. Is that ended?